So I have the pleasure of reciprocating for Janice this afternoon. I hope everybody enjoyed their lunch. We're in for a real treat. Janice Fiamengo, as most of you I think know, is an English professor at the University of Ottawa, has, I think, gone from being a feminist when she was younger, self-described feminist, to something perhaps a little different from that today, and I think she'll tell us a little bit about that transformation among her remarks this afternoon. I've always been very thankful to have her as one of the key advisors for the organization, and just a tremendous supporter, and just showed such initiative when we started talking about having a branch here in Ottawa. I think right from the beginning she was gung-ho and has served in different roles with the local community here, Catholic community in Ottawa. So it really is a pleasure for me to introduce Janice. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dustin. So my topic today, male-only universities, it's really a thought experiment. That's really a way of an occasion for articulating just how bad universities are, in my opinion, for young men today, as far as I can tell. I really can't imagine our present government or any government or any body in our society actually putting its support behind a university program, let alone an entire institution of higher education for men only. And Canada has, unfortunately, no real tradition of private universities. So this is the conundrum. It doesn't matter, in that sense, that we face a crisis of men's declining participation in higher education. It doesn't matter that male numbers at universities all across the English-speaking world are falling. An independent commission in the United Kingdom, for example, found in 2013 that young women were a third more likely to apply to university than men in the same age group. The latest Statistics Canada figures revealed that women earn 59.1% of all university degrees. Moreover, a 2013 report by two American economics researchers at MIT, it's a fascinating study called Wayward Sons, I really recommend it. It found that the decline in male higher education in the United States has been paralleled by a marked drop over the last 3 decades in male wages, male employment rates, and male occupational stature. Yet, not that many thought leaders are addressing this problem or studying ways to redress it. And of course, if our society refuses to face the issue or care about it, the problem of our wayward sons, as the study called them, will undoubtedly persist. It seems to me that the direction of our entire society is towards breaking up any club or organization or society or structure where men can be together as men, where they can experience their maleness as something good, or at least just something taken for granted. As a society, we recognize that it may well be beneficial for women to have women-only spaces, but the same is emphatically not true for men. The idea of men being together is seen at best as old-fashioned and maybe exclusionary, at worst as dangerous for women and toxic, to use the word of the day, for the men themselves. For as you all know here, we as a society, we've come to believe that there's actually something wrong with men. So when it comes to post-secondary education in the United States, women can choose to attend women-only colleges if they so desire. There are 39 women's colleges in the United States, and I don't think anyone would suggest that these shouldn't exist. But although historically there were many all-male colleges, today there are only 3 left. The history of all male colleges is the history of one after the other being forced to open their doors to women in the name of equality. So why not make it possible for men to choose to be educated in a separate institution if they so desire, in a college staffed by academically heterodox professors, in other words, professors who dissent from feminism and the other fashionable isms that dominate our universities, offering instead a range of traditionalist, free-thinking, and male-positive approaches to scholarly subjects. That would be my ideal. And what a change that would be. A university that actually made men feel welcome. It sure isn't the case now. Any male student attending a university today, I think, can't help but notice, at best, that university is a female-positive space, a female-centered space, in which the concerns and the experiences and the perceived needs of young women are clearly prioritized over men. Where the imperative is clearly to make women feel safe, valued, affirmed, supported, admired, applauded, and even protected from criticism. It would be very difficult for a young man today not to recognize in his classes and in the campus community at large an inordinate emphasis on women's experiences, women's challenges, the obstacles that women have valiantly overcome in the past, the continuing persecutions, belittlements, derogatory attitudes, threats, sexist discrimination, harassment, and misogynistic violence that they continue to face, and their admirable courage and chutzpah in doing so. It would also be difficult for this young man not to notice the subtle and often not so subtle stress on female moral superiority, on the greater contribution that women make to humanity, on women's manifold virtues, their superior qualities of nonviolence, nurturing, cooperation, empathy, and so on. That's what a young man will notice at best. At worst, he'll be made to feel not only secondary, but outright unwanted and disliked actively. He'll be made to understand that his presence is a danger, or at least a bother to women, and that he should watch himself at all times lest he offend by his mere presence and nature. He'll soon learn that he is the heir of generations of supposed male privilege, that he should be ashamed of that, apologetic about it, and that in order to atone for this privilege, he should take a step back and allow his sisters to come to the fore. He's supposed to cheer as their numbers rise in his classes, as they take the good jobs, as they get the best scholarships, as they do better than he does. If he doesn't cheer, he's told he's a despicable woman-hater who deserves nothing but contempt. In the modern politically correct university, this young man will be given a clear message that his sexuality is always potentially predatory and violent and abusive, that he needs to be taught not to rape and harass, and that he'll just have to get used to living his life in fear that a female classmate will find his romantic overtures threatening, his gaze too intense, or his jokes or comments somehow demeaning, and that he just might have to be disciplined or even expelled as a result of any number of unintended or fantastical offenses, and that there's basically nothing he can do about that, and that almost nobody will object, because likely even his friends And teachers and parents will agree that modern society is sexually dangerous for women, and that women, even adult women, supposedly sexually liberated women, must be protected from anything that might make them uncomfortable. At the very least, a young man today will realize that every day he should suppress his feelings, his objections, and his opinions if these are deemed unacceptable to his female classmates and teachers. And he'll know that his worries, his insecurities, his perceptions of injustice are of no interest to anyone important. This subject of mine today, this sort of impossible subject of a male-positive university space, it's perhaps the one closest to my heart, and it's really what brought me to be involved in men's issues advocacy in the first place. I date the beginning of my conscious and proactive commitment to men's situation at university to the fall of 2012, to the now famous Warren Farrell protest at the University of Toronto that my friend Steve Brule caught on camera for all to see. Especially that moment, and I'm sure many of you will remember it, when a young man trying to attend Farrell's talk was prevented from entering the building and had to endure the repeated verbal assaults of the crowd that had gathered, their taunting, their obscenities, their insults, their fake cheers. This was a young man, as Steve's interview revealed, who had had two friends commit suicide in the previous 2 years, and he'd come to hear Farrell in the hope that he would find some kind of understanding about what they'd been going through. His quiet dignity in the face of the vapid viciousness that he encountered was just breathtaking. And the event was an outrage that the University of Toronto leadership never even, to my knowledge anyway, never even acknowledged, let alone apologized for or expressed distress about. Watching that was the turning point when all the, for me, when all the, sort of inchoate thoughts and feelings, impressions that had been stirring in me for years, really ever since I started teaching at the University of Saskatchewan in 1999, when all those thoughts coalesced into a really visceral apprehension of the obscenity of the man-hating project that academic feminism has become. I had seen it for years before, but I hadn't fully understood what I was seeing because, of course, we're all in some way programmed not to see it, or to think that it doesn't really matter, that young men are resilient, that after all they have all that male privilege and all that entitlement and ease in their bodies, and therefore any assaults on their dignity won't cause any lasting damage. Might even be good for them, as some noted feminist authorities have been heard to say. It would lead to greater empathy for the situation of women. This is the lie that feminist activists tell themselves about their hateful propaganda. I met feminists like that at the University of Saskatchewan, where I had my first full-time job. Women who just simply preferred female students and thought it was a righteous project to make that preference clear in all their teaching and their advocacy work in the university, even down to the way they assigned grades. I'd seen it for years in university classrooms, in the everyday, normalized, gynocentric bias of lecture materials and assumptions and perspectives. And I had wondered what it must be like, sitting there day after day, hearing nothing good about men or the civilization men built. Certainly no thanks or gratitude or admiration or even acknowledgement. There's nothing but condemnation of male violence and contempt for male being. Constant refrains about patriarchy, male subjugation of women, male objectification of women, women's heroic struggle for political rights, women's heroic struggle to enter the professions, women's self-sacrifice in child rearing, and on about male indifference, male entitlement, male brutality, day after day, month after month, year after year. No wonder men's attendance at university is decreasing. I gave a lecture about academic feminism as an intellectually hollow and incoherent discipline at the University of Toronto the following March in 2013. I didn't know what to expect at all, wasn't prepared in any way. It was after that the emails started coming in and haven't stopped to this day, emails from young men saying what it is like to feel that hated. They answered that wondering that I had earlier. They told me what it's like to listen to lies about female victimization and toxic masculinity, to be belittled and denigrated with false statistics and fantastical theories, and to know they couldn't object. They just had to sit through it day after day, month after month, and they told me what that did to them and how they felt that nobody in the whole society cared or even believed it was real. They told me how frustrating and demoralizing it was to know that many of their feminist teachers had an overt, proudly declared animus against them, and that there was nothing they could do if they hoped to get a decent mark in the course except go along, pretend to believe, repeat the required orthodoxy. They wrote to me about how they hated the pious messages about rape culture or preventing violence against women that they continually received from their university administrators. The implication always that they had to man up, that they were somehow responsible, that they somehow benefited from this violence. And how if they tried to voice an alternative opinion anywhere on campus, they were immediately denounced and vilified, labeled a cisgendered white male oppressor whose opinion was irreverent, it was irreverent too, irrelevant, ignorant, hateful, and dangerous. Just last week I had an email from a student at Concordia University in Montreal about the effect on him of the bullying groupthink of anti-male orthodoxy after a 4-year degree in international studies. This is an excerpt from the email. He wrote, "I can only say that by the end of my program I had come to despair about the possibility of any dialogue whatsoever with third-wave intersectional feminists. Their total lack of sympathy or respect for men and for anyone who disagreed with them was appalling. One girl told me during a class discussion, her voice shaking with rage, that I could never understand the experience of rape and therefore had no right to voice an opinion. Later, she lodged a complaint with the instructor in the course saying that my presence in the classroom made it an unsafe space. The professor, also committed feminist, advised me of the complaint against me, warning me that I was at times insensitive in my manner of speaking and that I should spend more time listening to the voices of marginalized people. I definitely got the sense that there was a hierarchy of concern and care in that classroom, and that I, as a heterosexual white man, was at the very bottom. At first, I tried to see that course and others like it as a learning experience. But after a while, I just gave up. It was so tiring and demoralizing to feel everyone looking at me, hating me for being a privileged oppressor of women, a rape apologist, a misogynist, an abuser. I'm none of those things. but by the end of the course, I was beaten. I accepted my pariah status and I began to doubt my own thought processes. I resigned myself to being vilified whenever I expressed my own views. That kind of experience, which is, as far as I can tell, absolutely normal, not unusual at all. It should have no role in any university worthy of the name, and yet it is typical of what's going on in countless classrooms all across the country. And as rape culture hysteria becomes more and more entrenched in campus communities, and as Canadian universities, following the American pattern and learning nothing from its disasters, as they begin to implement so-called victim-centered policies to deal with campus sexual misconduct, we can expect that men's experiences of being vilified, accused, mistrusted, and found guilty will certainly increase. Just the other day, a student at McGill University sent me his university's draft policy on sexual violence, supposedly being sent out to all the university communities so that everybody could have buy-in, stakeholder buy-in, as they call it. I can just imagine how much buy-in his response would be allowed if he objected to the policy. And I was struck by the remarkable similarities between that policy and the one my own university has recently adopted, both of which manifest a terrifying indifference to the rights of accused students, who are almost always, of course, male. The policy draft, sent on behalf of the provost and vice principal academic of McGill University, begins with the claim that male sexual violence against women is rampant on Canadian college campuses. It employs statistics that, if true, would mean that the experience of women on university campuses in Canada was equivalent to that of women in such countries as the Congo and Haiti. These statistics, of course, justify the dramatic expansion of funding to administrative bodies on campus dedicated to so-called educating, in other words, indoctrinating, monitoring, surveying, and advocating around feminist theories of sexual violence, of male sexual violence against women, as well as to providing support for so-called survivors and to holding so-called perpetrators accountable. That very language, of course, of survivors and perpetrators, which assumes facts not yet established, provides a ghoulish glimpse into the Orwellian dimensions of these policies. Among other things, the policy language stresses that one of its primary objectives is to, and I'm quoting from the document, to, quote, prioritize support for survivors while not diluting or interfering with alleged perpetrators' procedural equity guarantees. Even amid that puffy academies, the contradiction is pretty glaring. How can you name survivors on the one hand, but only alleged perpetrators on the other? If every gal who comes forward is a survivor whose dignity and real suffering must be supported, then how can a perpetrator be only an alleged one? What happens to believing the survivor? How can she be a survivor if her allegation is only an allegation and not an immediately accepted truth? And if support for her is prioritized, if her dignity and feelings, her truth must be protected above all, then how can the alleged perpetrator's procedural fairness not be interfered with? It's a system that cannot but fail disastrously, and yet it is being adopted enthusiastically at every Canadian university. We know from the manner in which allegations of sexual misconduct have been mishandled on college campuses in the United States for the past 3 years. There are now masses of lawsuits against universities for the way they have, the outrageous, unbelievable way they have treated men accused of the most ridiculous crimes and not allowed in any way to defend themselves. So we know from the way those cases have been handled that victim-centered justice means that, it sounds great, but it means that the rights of the accused students count for next to nothing, well, count for nothing. The accused in these kinds of cases is almost invariably not even entitled to know the exact nature of the charges against him, is not allowed to have legal representation, is not allowed to confront his accuser, is not allowed to bring forward exculpatory evidence in the form of emails and text messages. It's astounding that this is going on across university campuses, with of course, at government initiative. These are kangaroo courts sacrificing the dreams and life goals and reputations of young men on the altar of ideological rectitude. As I said before, no wonder men are declining to attend such institutions. They've got my thought experiment, my impossible dream. The fact is, universities are already, in a sense, single-sex universities. They're female-only spaces, explicitly designed to support female students. Men just happen to still attend them. That's it. So I look forward to your thoughts, questions, criticisms. I'll put my glasses on now so I can see.
First of all, thank you for your excellent work and this terrific presentation. I'm sorry I didn't videotape it. Some of my male students asked me, should we marry? I said, I'm not too sure. I said, if you are going to marry, don't marry a university graduate. She's more than 40% likely to divorce you, and over 94% likely to get custody of your beloved children. And he said, and in the meantime, I said, don't date on campus. There are plenty of women online who want a young male university student like you for all kinds of fun. And they're not going to cause you any problems. I said, yeah, but those girls are really pretty. I said, I know that. Try wearing a cross. Tell them you're going to be chaste unto marriage. I said, that'll keep them away.
Well, this is the problem. I've had so many men write me, and I'm in the process now of putting together my book, which I've tentatively titled Sons of Feminism, which is not just about young men, although that was my original vision, but I've got stories from a lot of young men and men not so young, talking about, on the one hand, what it means to be told that your desire to be sexually intimate with a woman is in itself potentially criminal and certainly likely in some way harmful to the woman. The feminist insistence that sex in itself, nearly heterosexual sex of course, in itself nearly always harms the woman. That is, it's amazing what that does to young men, who have these, of course, intense sexual desires and longings for intimacy, for love, or for pleasure. And their emotional torment as a result of the messages that they're receiving, and of course the real danger that they're in. Yeah, no matter what they do. I mean, I don't know if I think they're maybe somewhat safer off campus, but not really. We've had all sorts of cases in the news recently showing us that nearly any sex can now be reformulated, reconditioned as rape, depending on how the woman describes what happens. And the feminist insistence on affirmative consent, on yes means yes, yes at every stage of the proceedings, which is entirely contrary to how human beings actually interact in intimate sexual situations, is a recipe for disaster. So I don't actually know how to advise young men who come to me for advice. I see lots of conversations under my videos, and more men, yeah, are just checking out altogether, wanting to have absolutely nothing to do with women, nothing to do with society at all. It's just way too dangerous in all its dimensions. And the thing about my proposal is that I would think it would actually be supported by feminists if feminists really believed their own hype. If it's so dangerous at all these university campuses for women, if women face not only a 1 in 4 chance of sexual assault, but also, massively increased chances of harassment, derogatory attitudes, demeaning comments, objectification, attitudes that make them feel bad about their bodies, etc., etc. If that's really the case, although why then do women continue going to university in ever greater numbers? They seem to be having a pretty good time there. But if it's really such a terrible place, they should be in favor of this kind of separation. It would mean certainly that all of the concerns about women's safety could be done away with. So I would think feminists would be advocating this, but I suspect that they wouldn't for a number of reasons that we could also talk about. Yeah, next question.
Hi, Janice. I'm just curious, last I checked, you were still a professor here in Ottawa, okay, so you still are. So I'm just wondering how you've dealt with some of the backlash towards you. Has this affected you personally or professionally, and if so, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, well, I've got my female privilege to protect me. So far, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but actually I've received very little backlash. Nothing like what you've experienced, what other young men who've tried just to form a men's issues club have experienced. Nothing like that. There's the revolutionary student movement that has shut down our talks regularly. They don't like me at all, and they did try to get me fired last year with a letter campaign to various university officials and stuff like that, but I'm not that easy to get rid of. I had an uncomfortable conversation with the vice dean of students at the university for an hour, and I got really mad, actually, because he was sort of like, he phoned me up and said, well, I've heard that there's a student group that they have some problems with you, but then I was speaking to your head of department and he informed me that you have some problems with them too. So I see that maybe it's, we both have problems. So, and I exploded and said it's not that way at all. But so yeah, there are people who don't like me on campus, but I think I'm a woman and I can get away with a lot that a male professor wouldn't be able to get away with. And there are certainly cases of male professors in the United States. One fellow, Dennis Gowes at Springfield College, I believe, who has tried to do a Men in Literature course, and we've been on Facebook a little bit. He's had a terrible time as a result of just a few student complaints, and he's had all sorts of now oversight and people telling him he can't teach the course in the way that he would like to teach it, even though there are women in literature courses and black literature courses that are explicitly ideological in their focus. And there's another fellow who I'm blanking on his name right now, former medievalist, and again in an English department, which I think just goes to show that English departments are probably the worst of all, who has been persecuted for after retirement sort of coming out as a men's rights advocate and writing a blog about his experiences. It's amazing the hate that poured out for him. So Yeah, so far, not really too much. I guess I would just say that I feel kind of alienated at the university. And I feel really bad about the lies that pass as truth there. And there's nothing much that a few people can do about such a widespread conspiracy.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming today again. You kind of took the question right out of my mouth. But as a PhD student, almost finished, I'm interested in doing being a professor, whatever that means. I guess you just said there's no advice you can give, but I'm wondering if there is advice you can give for someone who's looking to educate at the post-secondary level, especially in a STEM field. I have a little bit of separation, but...
Yeah, although STEM are now coming under incredible attack, actually. The STEM was a place where brilliant men could kind of hide out and do their research and stay away from the gender wars for a time, but I think that's the new arena for feminist and SJW activism. I don't know, I don't want to discourage you. I would say go for it and be the best you can be in your work. I would certainly not widely broadcast until you have tenure your views, because there is no doubt that there will be someone, and probably more than one someone, in whatever department you're in, who will not think twice about trying to get you fired or not hiring you in the first place. I've sat through innumerable hiring sessions where people were ruled out of bounds because they didn't hold to the orthodox views. And so these people, they are not in favor of diversity in any way, and they see nothing wrong with using their power to make sure that people who aren't believers stay out of the institution. So I would say, yeah, go for it, absolutely. We need people who aren't crazy teaching, for sure. And but you've got to be very careful about who you talk to about what you believe until you're in a secure position, and never forget that.
Okay, thank you again for coming, Janice. I was after the Parliament sexual harassment scandal that happened a few years ago.
Yeah.
It kind of got buried. I talked to my MP in my area, and she said that it was an extramarital affair that they just wanted to bury that got out of hand. But from that,
that was my understanding too.
Yeah.
How that counts as sexual harassment.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and it was both consensual.
Yeah.
They just wanted it to bury, and even the second woman had to be dug up from a case 2 years past. But out of that, not only did the Guelph University, that has a ratio of 6 women to 1 man at their university, got a $200,000 to study gender-based violence on campus. That's an extreme amount of money. And then we have our Prime Minister, who's also saying that he's a feminist and he supports this. By that same standards that you brought up, that almost anything sexual now is rape, including
Harassment, certainly.
or
yeah.
harassment. It's like because I had heard that like drunk now, if people are drunk, she cannot give consent, even if legally. That's a legal statement that she cannot, even if she wants to, give consent. So is our Prime Minister like a sexual assailant? Because I'm sure he's had drunk sex with his wife at some point or another. And is he wrong in supporting this idea? But I wanted to mainly, that's one question. And the other question was on Christina Hoff-Sumner's and Camille Paglia has a 1-hour talk with each other on YouTube.
I think I've seen that one, yeah.
Okay, they're talking about basically all the efforts women had made throughout history to be taken seriously as adults, and that they had fought in order to be let out. They used to have curfews where women weren't out after 11
in the dorms.
Yeah, in the dorms, so you can't go out because you might be raped. So what they did was they fought in order to say, hey, we're adults, we want to be set free and we'll take our chances and everything like that. And they feel that they've been pushed back into a period beyond that all their efforts to achieve their freedom and achieve their independence and be treated like adults have been pushed back by modern
yeah.
modern feminist ideals on campuses, and do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, that's the sort of, I'm going to sound really cynical, that's the, I think, politically safe thing to say, is that you deplore these modern excesses because they infantilize women. And so we're all in favor of women's adulthood, and we don't want to see women infantilized. But and it's true that it is a kind of infantilization, but it's certainly giving an awful lot of power to these women. So they're not really being infantilized. So yeah, to a certain extent, I think there were those two strains in the second wave of feminism in the early 1970s. But right from the very beginning in the 1970s, there was also the whole strain of rape crisis feminism, as manifest in the writings of Susan Brown Miller and then Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon and all of that. And that really did, I think, if not absolutely take over the mainstream feminist movement, it certainly impacted the way in which it made its way into policy and general social attitudes. And I don't hear a lot of feminist leaders articulating the necessity of women, being treated as adults. Christina Hoff Sommers does describe herself as a feminist, as does Palia, but they certainly don't represent any significant number of mainstream feminists. So yeah, that's an argument to be made, and it's certainly true, but I think there was always in feminism that man-blaming, that determination to punish men for their supposed crimes against women, and I think a lot of people don't really want to be free and self-determining. It's really scary, and to be both free and protected is a lot more attractive.
Yeah. And what about our Prime Minister? Do you think he has drunk sex at all?
I wouldn't want to speculate about that.
Are we talking just his wife, or? I have to say it, I'm sorry.
How dare you talk about Sophie like that?
I also wanted to say that one of the mottos that I came up with was that anti-feminism is the radical notion that women are adults.
That's
so
good, yeah.
That needs to go on some t-shirts. I will take my 10% cut, thank you very much. But I do want to also say, because people were asking advice in terms of, being able to teach at universities, and tenure is the big one. But there are some people out there like yourself, and not always women. Jordan Peterson routinely speaks out against the orthodoxy in terms of social constructionists and stuff like that. And he says that, I don't know how I get away with the stuff I do. And I know exactly how. You, Janice, are completely unapologetic and completely unashamed of what you think, and you say it. And when somebody calls you a misogynist or a rape apologist or whatever, right? The closest to you I've ever come, I think, was, well, I'm sorry to hear that you feel that way, okay? To an actual apology, and that's a total non-apology. It's a brilliant one, but it is. It's a non-apology. And I don't think I've ever heard Jordan Peterson apologize for anything that he has ever said that made a feminist want to, spit nails, right? Ever. And I think that that's the key. If you want to stay safe, you don't show that you're vulnerable. You don't show the slightest trace of guilt or shame or anything that they can use, right? Because if you apologize once, that's not going to be the first time. It's blood in the water.
Not gonna be the last.
More and more and more and more. And so you're you're done. The moment that you act like you have anything to be ashamed of. And that's what I love about you, because you're awesome.
Thank you. Running out of time, so maybe these will be the last two.
One last.
Hi. Thank you, Janice, for your talk. I've been at the Carleton campus, a student at Carleton University for the last 6 years, and at St. Paul for 3 years before that. I think that sexual assault on campus is a really, really complicated issue that spans so much experience, from really extreme, what we would all understand to be rape and agree with rape as a horrendous thing, to to things that can be seen as failed communication.
Bad
right?
sex, basically.
Pardon?
Bad sex.
Bad sex. And then there's that sort of gray area in between where people have a variety of experiences and opinions. My understanding of these policies is that they're being brought forward to respond to many decades of women not being heard about their experience of being raped, of being basically told that they should just go home if they can't suck it up, and dropping out of going to class and having the person who raped them in the class with them and not being able to do anything about it, which is a horrendous situation. So right now what I see are both men and women, it's like two different universes. Not that I really accept the men are from Venus, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, but there does seem to be these two wide experiences sometimes of the same incident, right? So what am I trying to get to? What I'm trying to get to is that I think some of these policies, that's what they're trying to address, and I'm interested in finding out, and I'm aware that there's been misservice out of some of these policies that have been enacted in the States. And as part of a group that actually was discussing that, Carleton is preparing its sexual assault policy right now, and there's a lot of work being done on campus to try to address both the support to survivors and the due process needs for within an accused and accuser context. So one of the things I think that needs to happen, or that is happening, is that can we provide services to somebody who's upset? Can we provide counseling to that person? Can we address what their needs are without a criminal process? And can we have a process?
Well, not if the need requires punishing the so-called perpetrator who hasn't actually been found guilty of anything. I mean, that's the whole problem. I have no problem with women being supported if something has happened to them and they're upset about it. I don't know why the university has to do that, quite frankly. The university is supposed to be a place where we pursue truth, which is in itself an incredibly difficult and complex undertaking. To also be the place where people's personal wounds are healed. There are other places that exist for that. There are counseling services for that. There's a police station where you go to report a crime. The idea that universities have to take on that entire burden, even though the people who work in universities are not trained to do that, seems to me quite extraordinary. It certainly involves a massive expansion of the administrative bureaucracy in universities. It makes universities much, much, much more expensive places to run.
So at Carleton, there's one person who is doing counseling for sexual assault survivors. One person in a staff of, 20,000 or something. And across universities generally, they're able to do only crisis counseling. So I had a friend who worked at a university, Canadian elite Ontario University. They could see people once, twice, 3 times, and then they're basically a referral service. The larger question that you're asking there, I think, is worthy of talking about. The only piece that I wanted to make the point on is that Carleton is, in my only experience of creating one of these policies, is that Carleton is trying to find a way to honor and meet the needs of everybody involved. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I mean, certainly at the University of Ottawa, we have had a process in which a number of people were involved in framing the document, and every single person involved in framing the policy statement was a feminist ideologue, as far as I could tell, including Elizabeth Sheehy, who, I mean, why would anyone put her in charge of a process that would care in any way about due process, and she is someone who believes that men should be killed if merely it can be alleged that they are batterers. This is not somebody I would want in any way to be making decisions that are going to impact how young men can defend themselves against charges of sexual assault. And I mean, as far as I understand what's going on in the United States, there are so many cases of men who have been expelled from the university and have never been found guilty of anything in a court of law. So who decides that what they have done is something worthy of that kind of punishment? And it's somehow brought forward as diminishing the harm that, oh well, they're not being put in jail, they're just being expelled from school, having their reputation ruined, their life dreams smashed, their hopes of having a viable future destroyed. I think it's remarkable that universities would feel that that's an area where they should go. Certainly refer young women to services if they need support services. Why would the university think that it should take on the role of punishing students?
Just very quickly, I'm just wondering if the policy you're talking about is written in a gender-neutral way, or is it clearly women, men?
Well, it starts off talking about the experiences of women and men, but then it very quickly switches into, and in fact it performed a survey of male and female students' experiences, which found that both experience things that they call sexual harassment, many of which are not what any normal person would actually call sexual harassment. Things like overhearing a joke that you thought was offensive, or having someone refer to you in a way that you found discriminatory, or something like that. The minor things, or an unwanted kiss on the cheek, or being persistently asked out on a date, and having the person not go away permanently when you said no once, and things like that. But anyway, so they found both men and women had had these experiences, but then they immediately go into talking about the way in which this can be dealt with, and the whole focus is on what they call, gender transformative training, which is not about teaching women to be different in any way. It's about teaching men not to be masculine. That's one of the huge planks. So it's very clear that the entire focus, the whole problem in the university is men, and women are the victims. And so any attempt at serving both parts of the population collapses at that point. I mean, I just don't know why universities should be in the business of punishing anybody. These people who sit on these boards, they don't have any training, they don't know how to collect evidence or interview witnesses, and they're not even interested in doing that anyway. They're interested in fulfilling what they see as their mandate, which is to protect women and to honor survivors. So they've already decided that women who come forward with their sad stories must be survivors, and they must be honored. So you can't fully investigate the story, because that's not going to honor their truth, or it's not going to manifest that you believe them. So I don't see how it could ever come to any kind of just accommodation with that kind of starting point. I think I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think pesky evidence, pesky investigation, pesky due process.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say a couple things here. Would you say that, would it be an accurate position to take that we live in a get liquored up hookup culture?
Well, that's it, yeah. We live in a hookup culture, and it often is not very nice for the young women, or for both perhaps, but I can imagine that the young women often feel bad about the experience.
What would you have to say about the popular number, 460,000 women raped, which comes from work done by Professor Holly Johnson, when in those numbers and in that survey, 58% of that 460,000 said that they did not consider it sexual assault, which would drop that number off the top of my head to around 184,000 and not 460,000. And then in 2009, it went from 58% to 68% did not consider it a sexual assault. What do you think about her also being involved in a situation where they erased male victims of domestic violence multiple times?
Yeah, well,
what do you think about organizations like the Ottawa Coalition to End Violence Against Women, who are highly critical of organizations like CAFE, who basically say we need to care about our sons as much as we care about our daughters. What do you say about
Yeah,
them?
I'm going to ask you to pose a question.
Sorry, what would your take be on those organizations being listened to as our critics?
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, you're the expert on this. You've done the digging into their mishandled misrepresentations of statistics, and you know better than I do all of the falsehoods that organization headed up by Holly Johnson is responsible for. And yeah, I think there is a kind of mental imbalance there that prevents her and her people from recognizing the suffering of men. And so for her to claim that CAFE delegitimizes women's experience of violence is a rich example of projection. You nailed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for one and all.
Thanks for your great questions. Thanks, Janice, for your presentation.